Hello and welcome to another episode in our mini-series from the Developing Practice podcast. This series is all about hybrid practice, whether that be leading hybrid teams, developing hybrid teaching, or working in a hybrid manner. We have spoken with lots of guests over the past couple of years and have extracted snippets of conversations for this series. Today's compilation is all about the experiences of developing the online aspect of a hybrid environment. We hope you enjoy.
I'm interested in hearing how that then translates to your work around networks. So if I think about some of the networks that I run at the university across the institution, when we all moved to home working, all of those networks moved online overnight, like literally overnight. And obviously, I've now had time to embed some of those networks. And I think a little bit like you're saying, I would never now go back. I mean, there is some value in some face-to-face work, but I'm loving what we're doing online. I think it works for people working in HE as well, in terms of developing those networks synchronously and asynchronously online. So I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about the work you've been doing in regard to supporting networking in a kind of hybrid working environment.
Okay, so there's a couple of things here. I think, because I do a lot of work with business schools, and there are certain situations where I think it's absolutely vital that we do eventually get back to face-to-face stuff. Because one thing's for sure is that having 20 people on a call versus 20 people in a room, there's a distinct difference. So when I talk about I don't notice the difference, I am talking about one-to-ones. Okay, now if you're then looking at group situations, the dynamic is without a doubt different. When I was teaching, well, I still do teach networking skills, but one of the questions that comes up 100% of the time when I was doing it, when I was actually in a group of people, was how do you break into a group? That was a bit that came up 100%. And I could talk to a chief exec and I could be talking to students, they all ask the same question. Now, in basics, you would go eye contact, move in, chat, in basics. Now, one of the problems is that people were nervous over, but what do you talk about? How do you know what they're talking about? So one of the great delights about being on a screen is that you know exactly what conversations are going on. So that's really good news. However, the difficulty when you're in a group situation online is that when do you jump in? And what happens if you've got dominant people? What happens if you're a real strong introvert? You know, it's there are some challenges around that. But those challenges are just different challenges to what we used to do when we did in group situations. So it's just a case of, you know, how do you work around that? So, you know, yes, I've been doing lots of stuff online and everything. But I suppose what I've tried to do is to make it normal. I think this has been the challenge, isn't it? There was a point when, I mean, like I sort of said earlier on, is that when it first happened, I lost my whole identity. I just didn't know who I was. And then I went into, well, do you know, if this is going to carry on for a while, why don't I make this normal in my head and in my emotions as much as in the way that it's going to work? And in a group, there's always the dominant, there's always the gregarious, there's always the chatter, you know, there's always the shy, there's always the introvert, there's always the clumsy one. The characters are always there.
I think there is exactly what you're saying around this kind of normalizing what is normal. So pre-COVID, meeting online like this, it was so unnormal, wasn't it? Whereas now I think kind of with, you know, we're a year on, it has become normal, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And the introvert, the extrovert, the clumsy one, people know how to interact now online to maybe get the best of themselves in a networking context.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not going to get back to pre-COVID anytime soon. And even when we do get back to whatever that normal is going to be, there, without a doubt, we're going to have this blended approach, aren't we? Because, you know, a lot of people, you know, there's so many cost savings in doing it this way versus doing, you know, getting into a group and doing all of that stuff. And I understand the hunger that people have to get back into that. But it's not going to be the same as was, because there's too many inequalities around the jab and the environments and everything else like that. So I sort of think, let's get on with what do we want to create? This is an opportunity that we could really take advantage of massively. Do you remember, sorry, I'll chat for ages on this one, but do you remember, students used to turn around and say, my problem is I'm living in I'm sort of coming over to the UK, I'm doing my studying over here, but all my contacts are back in China and Russia and Italy and Spain and wherever else. And how do I keep those relationships going? And they always felt like the poor part of the relationship when it comes to networking. Well, of course, now they are the ones who really got it. So now, I mean, I was talking to this guy over in South Africa, was it this week? No, New Zealand. And it was awesome. That's 12 hours difference. It was 6 o'clock in the morning his side. It was 7 o'clock in the evening my side of it. And we were having a good old natter. And I was thinking, this is phenomenal. Do you know what I mean? I just sort of think, this is great.
Yeah, when the pandemic happened and we moved to Teams, you had a big resource of things there that we could learn from and jump on. So it was, the timing was perfect for us.
Yeah, I just put the seed, and nobody predicted what was going to happen. We didn't know 2020 was going to be such a miserable year and we were going to go home. But I had a lot of faith in what I was doing. And I had a lot of initiative and interest in really changing the way we deliver our teaching for our students. To me, that's the bottom line, because we have email now. At that time, this is how our students are going to communicate, and it happened. The future is now. And I kept telling people, this is what the students are going to face. They'll face dynamic collaborative environments. You can't just rely on a static VLE that is a repository, because that's not how people work anymore. And look, just things accelerated. The way we work accelerated with the pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just going to reflect on my own personal situation. I remember when Teams was introduced to us, probably by Matt, I can't remember. And I was like, oh my gosh, another WhatsApp. Like, it's just going to bombard me all day long, like the WhatsApps do. And then you're right, we all moved home because of the pandemic. And it's been a lifesaver for me in terms of, just being able to continue to engage with my colleagues. As you know, I lead the Ultra program, and we've moved all of the panels asynchronously onto Teams channels. I've been involved in leading conferences that we've run through Teams, and it's just been such a brilliant platform to do that. But I have to say, your Microsoft Teams Champions has been a massive lifesaver for us, because it's been that community of people, which is what you're describing, where we've been able to go with the silly questions, with the little questions, with the big questions. It's been great to have that resource to draw from. So in terms of the impact that your innovation has had, have you been able to monitor any of that impact? I mean, I can tell you personally that it really has saved many of the projects that I've been involved in. But have you started to kind of monitor some of the impact that you're having with your innovation?
Yes. So there are two ways, formally and informally. Every 6 months or every year, I have roundtables or community forums in which I collect feedback around how the space needs to be managed and how it needs to be developed. One of the biggest impact is that the champions model, which is community of practice, peer coaching, because at the end, one of the key factors is the peer coaching. And I'll go back to that in a minute. Community of practice, peer coaching, and champions roles. Is that this has been used internationally. The center, CIE has won a bid to give consultancy to the British Council to support Peruvian universities. So the model was part of the bid, and we succeeded when we applied. And part of the model was to create a community of practice following that model, because we had leaders. In this case, they weren't called champions; they were called leaders. Support them, train them similarly to what was done in the champions community, and they in turn, their job is going to give this knowledge, this kind of exclusive training they got about teaching online, how to teach online, they're going to go back to the universities and create their own community of practice in which they are the leaders and the facilitators. And so far, I've heard some really good response. I think everybody's facing a lot of challenges. So internationally, 3 universities have created 3 different communities of practice following the model. To me, is a massive kind of evidence of the impact of this. And informally, I am observant of the community. So I observe the interactions between the members day in and day out. So to me, it's about the value. And if I observe that it brings value to the university, it means I'm doing a good job, the community is doing well, and that's the bottom line for me. The value is the main indicator of impact. There is no point in creating a community just because it sounds great, to have a space, to have a community, it looks good. If it brings no value and there is no interest from people. So to me, that's the way I monitor.
2020 was obviously a tough year, goes without saying. But there was a couple of highlights in there, and obviously the Champions site was definitely one of them. But another one was that you received the Liverpool Learning and Teaching Fellowships in 2020 in recognition of your innovations. So how are you planning to use that fellowship to further your developing practice?
Right, so I'm super grateful for that fellowship, because with the money I'm planning to develop, I'm developing at the moment. It's a video-based resource. It's an open source course, and I would like people to have access to that across the sector, across the world, if possible, because I think everybody should be able to replicate the success of the model. Like I said, maybe it doesn't work, but you have to try. And regardless of your gender, your status, your position, I think everybody should have access to the possibility of leading a change initiative. And to me, it's very important to share what the model is about, what works, what doesn't work, and just people to take on these resources and my experience and the elements of the model and how they kind of relate to each other. So I'm hoping this open source course will give these tools to people, regardless of their job or where they're at. If they want to do it, I think everybody should be able to do it. I also had a lovely interview with Wenger and Trainer, which are the power couple in communities of practice. And they're lovely. They were super useful. We had a nice conversation about what communities of practice are and what are not. And they were super candid about the mistakes and misunderstandings. And yeah, so I have shared the link for everybody who would like to watch it. They're really, truly the experts, and they were super useful when I had a chat with them. So that's how I used the money of the award. So thank you.
So what's been the most surprising thing you've learnt whilst creating and developing this innovation in the midst of a pandemic? So I guess we're talking here about the model rather than the specific of how you've used that model to roll out the use of Teams, but the model that you're developing. What's been the most surprising thing that you've learnt?
About the model, I think it's always about the people. I'm always surprised. I was very, very happy to see that leadership and commitment from others across the university to be there for others, regardless of their own personal crisis at the beginning of the pandemic, and still ongoing, because it's really hard for everybody. So to me, that has been the most rewarding. Yeah, for people who don't like the term champion, I think people really are champions in their own way, because no matter what, they put the interests of their colleagues beyond themselves, and they really step in and help others in whichever capacity they can. So yeah, that is always, to me, I'm amazed by the ability of people to just, do what they can for others for the benefit of the institution. That has been the greatest gift for me.
We've spoken with lots of people on the podcast since March, and who have all spoken about the impact of COVID, and you've obviously just mentioned it there with that doctor. It obviously threw a real spanner in the works in terms of how we go about our role, and particularly you, because your classroom development is unique from as far as what I've seen out there. It's highly, highly engaging. So what have you done to try and pivot that to online delivery? And have you managed to replicate it, or are you finding there's still issues?
Well, my thing is that because of being a teacher, I'm very much about kinesthetic, hands-on things. So, adults love it. You give them a bit of Velcro and they're happy. Sticking on the answers thing. And you might think, oh, it's all a bit naff, but people like it. They like to be able to touch the stuff. And that was a concern for me that, I can't use my famous Play-Doh games and the laminates and all that sort of stuff and the board games I've created. So I just thought about it. And then I utilized Zoom, which I find the best of the bunch, really. And you taught me about Mural, which not a lot of people have heard of. I have used Teams as well. I don't find that quite as interactive. I can still send people off to work into pairs, though, in Zoom, especially in small groups. What I do is I've created the same sort of learning tools. And what I do is I either email it out to them, or I've created a little game on whatever it is. I still use my films. I still use lots and lots of hands-on stuff. It's just that they're doing it on their own at the other end of a screen, still working with other people. So the feedback has been great. Yesterday, actually, I was teaching some people from Birmingham Council, and they were like, this is like better than being in a classroom. And they loved it because I was just getting them they're quite small groups. I don't have any more than 10 or 12 because it just becomes unmanageable. But they were able to go off in little groups and work on the tasks I'd give them to do, and they still came back and said how much they enjoyed it.
That's really interesting, that about the size of the group in particular. Obviously, we've got lecturers who are having to look after a lot of students online in sessions. So have you found that when you've gone over, I don't know, say 15, that you've run into issues, or you haven't managed to get the engagement?
Because I've got two screens, so I've always got the screen where I can see them as well as the presentation or whatever they're actually doing. And when you've got 18 people, so a good teacher can always you can find those learners who are hiding and are slipping behind and are rather passive people and not the ones who want to speak up. When they're on a screen, you just see their face. And when you've got 18 people on a screen, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and you can't pick up, can you, on those human nuances that maybe they're a bit lost, or maybe they don't really want to work with that person, or they don't like her over there, or Sandra's not very nice and Paul isn't, and Imran's a right git, and that's all that sort of stuff you get on training. So I just insisted really that it was a maximum of, I've actually said for some it's 14, because if they're on Zoom, they do lots of activities in small groups, so it's fine. But it's just that thing of the body language is missing, isn't it, behind the screen? Yeah. And we're all crying out, aren't we, for intimacy and just being able to touch somebody else. I think it's just shown how really important it is to us all. I'm very tactile. I don't go around grabbing older people on training. I'm not massively inappropriate, but like when I do autism training, when I'm talking about being on the spectrum, I often talk about people who can't see the mores and graces of everyday life, so that they don't understand the hidden rules of society. And part of that is, as I'm talking about it, I'll stand really close to someone on training, like really too close, and I'll invade their body space. And then I'll go right close to their face and go, did you get that? Did you understand it? And generally they're not like, in the classroom, they will go, yeah. And then everyone else laughs because they get it, like what I'm doing. But obviously behind a screen, I can't do that. So that sort of, the more physical approach doesn't work. It still works. I do miss the classroom though. I just miss.
Yeah, I bet.
When it comes to break time, everyone closes their screen and go off and do what they want, don't they? Well, not everyone. When I did Staffordshire County Council recently, that was lovely because at break time, they all kept their cameras on and all talking to each other. They didn't know each other. They were all from different departments. They were just very conducive to sharing stories. That they rushed off to make a cup of tea and came back to talk to each other. And then yesterday I was delivering compulsive hoarding training, trapped and drowning in my things. And 3 of the people at the end stayed behind because they were all from different organisations that could help this person. So that was great. Wow. It was a lovely networking thing. That's through Voices of Stoke, where they're funded by the big lottery to basically deliver training about lived experience and look at services based on how service users and residents of Stoke have used them and the sort of barriers that they've come across. And Voices of Stoke are just a great organisation that are working on how do we get rid of those boundaries, and these, we need to listen more to the voice of Stoke, the everyday people, not so much the professionals. Let's listen to what the expert citizens have got to say about life. And let's see how we can turn services around.